Jay. Welcome to the Digital Age Show where marketing meets results. Each week, there's a podcast and which we record with the industry leaders where we sit down with them, share proven strategies that have already driven online success for a lot of businesses out there. So get ready to transform your digital presence. I hope you enjoy the podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Digital Age Show. Today's guest is Mike Stiles, who is what we can call a media chameleon who is transformed from TV to radio journalist to comedy performer, content strategist, and a podcast host. From syndicated comedy networks to leading content at Oracle and brand content studios, he's a pioneer in blending entertainment journalism and corporate storytelling. So, hey, Mike, how are you? And I'll just let you introduce yourself to our audience.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. I've really been looking forward to this, and it's indeed a pleasure. So my background and kind of how I got into corporate content and corporate marketing and communications came through the back door, I guess. I started out in traditional media, which was started out as a TV news anchor and reporter, switched to hosting morning shows on radio stations in various markets across the country, like Cincinnati, Atlanta, Austin, Raleigh. So a lot of fun, ran a national radio network, came to Atlanta, where I'm based now, and started a live theater company. So I did all of those traditional media type things. And while I was working with the theater company, a friend of mine pulled me into one of the first social media marketing companies called Vitru, and just said, "Hey,
And
can
what year? Oh, sorry for interrupting. What year was that?
that was probably in the early 2000s.
Okay. Initial
Uh,
stages. Yeah, internet.
yeah. So right at the dawn of when the social media
Mhm.
thing was happening, and he asked, "Hey, can you come in and handle some of our content creation," which at the time was mostly writing. There was some video production as well. And I'm like, well, sure. I mean, the talent or the skill that I've used mostly through my career has been writing. So I thought I could translate that into the corporate sphere. And then Vitru got acquired by Oracle. So
Awesome.
that's kind of how I wound up in the space.
Great. So, coming to your corporate, like the digital content you were making. So, how did you came in the corporate digital content space? What put you into it? Like you definitely had a background into the content ecosystem, but what made you come in the corporate space?
Uh, I just kind of saw where traditional media was going. Radio was changing very quickly. The technologies around radio was changing. You know, broadcast radio is still around and people still listen to it. But the actual radio companies themselves started devaluing talent. The
Mhm.
advertisers were not as willing to pay what they used to pay for advertising on radio.
Right.
So as much as I enjoyed it, I just saw, okay, I need to make a shift to where the dollars are flowing just to keep my own career going. And that's where I went to the corporate space, because I really saw that was the dawn of when content was really starting to happen on the corporate side.
Awesome. So you started with the traditional media, and has it helped you in any way while you were approaching the corporate content space? Like, did it help anything, some of the things that were common between traditional space and the corporate ones, or has it changed completely?
Yeah, I think it really gave me a particular advantage because, you know, in traditional media, you can't just go on TV and get a show. You know, now
Mhm.
in the digital space, anyone can make anything and distribute it anywhere they want to. But
Right.
to be on broadcast radio or broadcast TV, you had to be uniquely talented in some way. Otherwise, no one would give you a show. So, you know, there was that. I exercised that muscle of, okay, I've got to put on a great show every single day, which is a real discipline. Um, Traditional media like radio, TV also taught me how to attract and hold and build and delight and create really vocal fans of audiences.
Okay.
And I think that's what corporations and corporate content, brand content is tasked with doing now, is putting out stuff that is meaningful and is valued by their audiences. So it really helped me there. And you kind of over time build like an intuitive muscle about who your audience is, how to win them over, how to get them to really like you. You're working cross format, like written, audio, video, graphics. So all of those things from traditional media absolutely applied as I came into creating corporate content. And it gave me that edge of, okay, I need to make this entertaining. And I don't know that a lot of brands were thinking in that direction. They were thinking marketing, content, and ads. And it's just like,
Right.
no, you got to put on a show, a great show.
So awesome. And then you have been an author too, and you have written about all your learnings overall in a like initial days of your work. So you have written a book. Tell us more about it, and how was the experience of writing a book, and what were the nuances involved in that?
Yeah, I wrote the book not because I thought I was going to make $1 million from selling a book or to be an influencer. I just wanted to get my thoughts out because this was around 2010, and that whole content marketing thing was just starting to happen, and brands were just starting to think about, oh, we can make our own stuff now. So
Right.
the book I wrote was called Showtime Brands as Content Producers. And
Okay.
what it was about reminding people, hey, in the old days, brands actually put their name on TV shows. You had the Texaco Star Theater, you had the Colgate Comedy Hour, you had Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. And so what's old is new again. Brands can do that today. They can have their own on-demand radio and TV stations,
True.
but not many of them are fully taking advantage of that.
Great. So you had your what we can say learnings around in 2010, and now the content space has evolved so much in 2025. So is there any difference? Are the baseline things same as they were in 2010? Would you recommend the same things that you have learnings that you have given in the book, or is there any difference in the current space?
Um, I think some brands are getting it right and some brands aren't. You think about, okay, what are brands doing really well and where are they coming up short? Well, where they're doing really well is embracing the technology that's available to them, like marketing automation, email platforms, segmenting, personalization, the ease of e-commerce, and now AI enters the pictures. There's aggressive adoption in those tools. But a mistake a lot of them are making is they're kind of getting lost in the toys, and they won't make seeing the world from their customer's point of view priority one, that obsession with the customer. And from a content perspective, an obsession with pleasing your audience. Or maybe it's just the implementation of the tools isn't going well because we all still get irrelevant emails with our names wrong, wishing us a happy birthday when it's not even our birthday, chat bots that don't understand our questions yet. There's some still really embarrassing customer
Right.
experiences being put out there.
Awesome. So you have worked with a lot of brands. You are currently working with a lot of brands, and many brands are killing it in social media and overall marketing right now. So where are some of the brands that you know are doing really well, and what do you think in the current scenario some brands are falling short of? What would be your suggestion to the brands or the brand managers listening to this podcast?
Yeah, well, the advice I get, well, first of all, the question that I ask the clients that I engage with and the prospects that I engage with is, what's your show? And when I ask them that, they get real confused. They kind of cock their head and look at me, like, what does that mean? What do you mean, what is our show? It's like, what is the thing that you're known for from a content perspective that people can count on getting from you on a regular basis? What's your show? What are you known for? And they can't answer that question usually. So my best advice is, maybe pump the brakes on hiring just marketing wonks and think more about hiring entertainers. You need entertainers and artists and journalists because they know what it means to have a brand show, to create brand content that truly entertains and captivates. it goes back to the art of the show, not just knowing what to make, but putting the right people in the right spots. And stop viewing content as just a box to check and all you care about is pushing something out the door.
Right.
That's not the path to great content.
Awesome. And then, like, you have been in the podcasting, uh, like, you have basically been in the podcasting game much more for a longer period of time, and you have built a career out of it, and you're currently working in it. So, what do you think, like, if given a choice between contents, different forms of content, what made you prefer podcasting as a format, and how did you embrace it? Basically, like, you have been involved into so much of podcasting itself as a genre. So what made you choose that, basically, when there are other formats available?
Yeah, well, coming from radio, I got to experience firsthand the power of audio to compel an audience to habitually listen and habitually engage with you. Deep relationships formed with people who never even met you. And that's everything that a brand should want. Authentic conversations, organic conversations between two human beings. It's unbeatable. It has been since we invented language. And if you deliver that at a consistent cadence, which good podcasts do, it works for brands in every way. I mean, what's better than a steady drumbeat of touch points with customers and prospects that builds exactly the targeted audience you want and makes them think of you first and makes them trust you? Is your white paper going to do that? I mean, please, I don't think so. And beyond podcasts, every podcast you make is a content multiplier, right? Every podcast episode can become a blog. It becomes multiple social posts. It becomes an infographics. It can be a foundation for your entire content pipeline.
Right. And so this is a great point of view, but then, you being worked with a lot of brands, you would have also been listening to a lot of reasons that brands give, that why they don't want to start a podcast, or how it won't help them. And what is your reaction to that, or what are the one of the most preferred reasons that is given by brands for not starting them?
Yeah, I mean, my close rate is pretty good, so I'm happy with that. But the ones who say no usually say no because, first of all, they haven't even thought about it. For whatever reason, as big as podcasting has become, as vital a marketing channel as that has become, they're not even having those discussions internally. So I try to start the discussion. The other thing is, I hear we had a podcast, but it didn't work. Well, what does that mean? It didn't work. How many episodes did you put out? Were you publishing consistently? Some of them think webinars are a replacement for podcasts. Like, if we do a lot of webinars, we don't need a podcast. That's really apples and oranges. That's a marketing lift every time you do a webinar, as opposed to I'm publishing consistently every couple of weeks.
Right.
And then others, they assume they would not have the budget or the resources for it. They need more of a turnkey operation, which I try to provide for them. And then most of the time I hear, I know about podcasting and I know we should, but they just stay stuck. They just stay silent on that marketing channel, which is becoming less and less tenable.
Okay, so is there, talking about numbers, how many podcasts has a business put out? Is there over a period of time, have you learned, or do you feel, is there a number that a brand should specifically put out this much number of podcasts out in order to even start, what you can say, start analyzing if it's generating any revenue or any returns? Is there any number, like, at least there should be 50 pieces of content or 50 podcasts or 100? Is there any number that you feel is a considerate amount of podcasts for a business?
Yeah, I think in terms of, okay, how much content do we need to promote or produce, and how many episodes do we need to put out? It kind of
Mhm.
depends on the show. It depends on the length of the show. It depends on the quality of the guests. It depends on how much marketing effort you want to put behind each episode. I
Right.
don't think you want to go less than one episode a month. Most
Mhm.
of my most of my clients are publishing around every 2 weeks.
Okay.
So that's going to reassure the audience that, hey, this podcast is worth subscribing to, because they don't just randomly put out episodes. I can count on getting something from them, at a regular clip.
Do you have a insight or a walkthrough situation for consider a business with a product? You can consider any product, and how their approach on a baseline, just on a like top view. What do you suggest? How should they go about with the content in the podcast? They want to start a podcast. There's a brand out there. They want to start a podcast, but they have no clue what to talk about or what to discuss in that. So like that is most of the businesses right now. They feel that they have to write the podcast wave, but then they don't know what exactly. Like, do you suggest it should be more about the product, or do you suggest it should be more about how they build the what is your recommendation on that?
Right. Well, I think a lot of them think they have to do, like I said, everything themselves, everything in-house, that they're going to need a very large budget for it, or they're going to need to assign staff resources to it. What I do is I break down everything that's involved step by step in putting up a podcast. I show them that list, and I just kind of say, I can do as much or as little of this as you want. So it kind of shows them everything that's required, everything that needs to
Mhm.
be done to keep a podcast, to create one, and to keep it up and going. And then it's like, depending on your budget, depending on how much you want me to handle, some podcasts I'm the host, some I'm not. Some
Right.
podcasts, I book the guests. Most of the time, the client, at least gets confirmation that the guest is willing to be on the show. So there's a balance of, okay, this can be a totally turnkey thing where you guys get a podcast every 2 weeks without thinking, just, stroke the check, make the budget. Uh, and I think compared to a lot of the larger podcast companies, a lot of brands would be surprised at how accessible opening that podcast marketing channel can be.
Awesome. So let's consider this the number of leads, or let's say converted clients. If a company is getting 100 clients every, that's a big number, but it's easier for calculation. So let's say a business is getting 100 clients via all the marketing channels. So let's consider they are putting out videos, they are doing their ads marketing, they're doing posting on LinkedIn, they're posting on social media, they're doing email marketing, they're doing everything. What is there an average number that you have figured out for businesses that do everything? So let's say, if I'm just assuming that if a brand starts podcast, and obviously the results from podcast is not directly like, you can't say that, okay, from the podcast channel itself we have got like 5 clients or 5% of the total clientele for that month. We can't even gauge that. But is there any ratio that you feel it's good for brand awareness, but okay, it helps in client acquisition or whatever the product is, in selling the product, in customer acquisition? Is there any specific ratio and specific percentage you feel that at least this much a business can get via this channel?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that, because that's a question that comes up a lot is, well, why should we do a podcast?
Yeah,
I know
exactly.
we
Yeah.
should, because, it's just as valid as having a blog. If you're doing a blog, but you're saying we don't need to do a podcast, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think the answer is every brand is going to have a different goal for their podcast. The main thing is product awareness. And again, that goes back to podcasts' power of creating regular, consistent touch points of value with your customers and your prospects. So every one of those shows, if people are listening to more than one show, that deepens that relationship between your prospect and your brand. the trust in your brand as a thought leader, as exhibited in your podcast, is going to go up. So not only is it an awareness factor, it's a trust and a deepening relationship factor. But I always want the podcast to get credit for what it creates. So when you have a podcast, you want to set up a landing page specific to that podcast so that at the end of the show, you say, hey, if you're interested, come to brand.com/podcast. That way you're getting traffic that can be directly attributed to what the podcast has created. And you're starting to see, yes, this podcast is feeding the top of the funnel. And, podcasting and audio in general can be used at any stage of the funnel to drive sales from the top to the bottom of the funnel.
Awesome. So do you feel that for the business podcast, for the corporate podcast, viewers or the listeners matter a lot? Do you think that it is an important factor to look after?
In terms of tracking the number of listeners?
Yeah, I'll just give you an example. If it's a podcast that basically a lifestyle podcast, or basically some businesses have a good amount of listeners for their podcast, and someone starting out might just have 5 or 10 people listening to the initial episodes, even though they put out newsletters or whatever it is, even they put out a landing page. If they don't promote it enough, there will be less than 100, less than 1,000 listeners. So do brands need to worry about the number of listeners for their podcast, or it's very immaterial for a business to know the number of listeners?
Yeah, for brand podcast, it's truly about quality versus quantity. So we're at a place in podcasting now where we were with blogs. It's like the old joke was everybody on the planet has a blog. So now that same thing is happening in podcasting, because anyone can start a podcast and it feels like there's 100 million of them out there. Well, how many of those are going to get the kind of numbers that, the Joe Rogan podcast gets, or all the pop culture, Conan O'Brien, those big podcasts that get millions of downloads? A brand is not going to get that, but it doesn't mean that there's not value to be had from the podcast. Again, it's like a blog. You can do a blog and do it consistently, but if you don't put promotional effort behind that blog and try to get eyeballs to it, it's not going to do you any good. So it depends on the brand properly promoting the podcast and each of its episodes, and doing what's required to build the audience that will serve the brand. I don't care about people who don't want to buy my product and never will. I only care about people who are interested in what I'm talking about and interested in what my business does. And that's the kind of podcast audience a brand wants to collect.
So it shouldn't be about how much sales I'm getting from this, how much clients I'm getting for this, how much leads I'm getting for that. It should be more about how many people want to listen to the process, know more about the business. So that matters a lot. What is your take on currently AI is everywhere? AI is basically everywhere, and then brands are preferring AI for their podcast. Like they might have AI voices or whatever it is. So what is your take on that? Or does quality will have an greater impact beyond the number of podcast business that can pull from AI, versus, let's say, 10 podcasts are being made with help of AI versus a one podcast where human interaction is basically available? So does what will sustain over a period of time?
Right. So I'm the farthest thing from anti-AI. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the real power of podcasting and of audio is authentic, organic conversations between two human beings. I have seen the tools where you can upload like a document or a white paper or a manual and create basically a fake podcast conversation between two bot-generated voices. So yes, you can create a podcast that's like that. And there may be some use cases for that. If it's just strictly informational, like a manual, like a user manual or something like that, then it's applicable to that. But overall, generative AI, I see as the greatest magic trick I've ever seen. And I say that because magic is illusion. And what AI does is create the illusion that you're interacting with a human or that your content was done creatively by a human. So I think my concern is on the human creativity side. I guess when AI can, on its own, without aggregating anything off the internet, have
Right.
empathy with me, have its own sense of humor and irony, come up with something completely original that moves me emotionally or inspires me, that's when I say AI can do what human artists like writers and performers can do.
Awesome. So we talked about AI. So what is your take on video podcasts? Like that's booming for sure, and many people are preferring it. Many times it doesn't work. The kind of listeners we get for audio is nothing compared to like it's a lot of the number is quite big compared to video podcasts. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think that's a big debate that's going on right now about do podcasts need to be video or have a
Right.
video component? But I say, I mean, I'm happy to do either. I can do video podcasts, I can do audio podcasts, but I always point out the unique power of
Mm-hmm.
audio. It's intimate. It's a one-to-one experience. It's proven superior in terms of engagement, listening length, and information retention. It's mobile, it's agile. You can listen while you're multitasking, which people love to do. It's easier and less expensive to do as opposed to proper video production.
Right.
It makes guests more comfortable and willing and focused on their answers because some people are uncomfortable on camera, even today, with cameras
Yeah. Yeah.
everywhere. You know, a
True.
guest might be more willing to come on if they know they're not going to be on camera. And really, it's the last refuge where you don't have to be glued to a screen. I mean, that meditating, reading a printed book, and going for a walk are literally the last four things I can think of where you're not required to look at a screen. And I think there's a nice value in that.
Awesome. So as we come towards the end of the podcast, we usually have a segment where an actionable insight is being shared with the audience because the audience is majorly between 20 to 30. So that age group, people are usually starting out their business. Let's consider a small marketer who is just getting started and
Mhm.
who wants to do podcasting. Just as you said, it should be a channel that he or she should be able to share his journey, information about the product, whatever it is. So let's say he's working in digital space. Let's say it's an email marketer, for example. And how should he definitely wants to expand this. He wants to go ahead and hire someone professional for doing his podcast, get the podcast edited professionally, but he doesn't have the budget for that right now. He's just starting out.
Mhm.
So what do you think? What do you suggest the approach should be for such a person who's just starting out, for a new business basically? How should they approach this podcasting thing?
Yeah, that too is a good question because so many businesses, especially new businesses and startups, could really benefit the most from podcasting because it's awareness that they need, as a priority.
Mhm.
I think step one is just educating yourself about what's involved. Like you said, a lot of people really have no idea. Well, you can come to someone like me, and I'm not going to charge you to show you all the steps involved. It's like, here are all the things you need to do to have a regular podcast. Then they'll know, okay, I don't have the budget to pay someone to do all of this, but I can handle like 90% of this myself, and I'm willing to dedicate the time and energy to do it. And then with the budget that I do have, I can get, the rest of the help I need. So it really is, it's almost like a buffet. It's like choose what you need and decide what you can do on your own. And then that's that balance, that dance of time versus money. If you don't have the money, then you need to be willing to invest the time in creating your own podcast and keeping it up and running with some help.
Awesome. So, are there any emerging technologies or emerging trends that you are seeing in the whole podcasting space, and you think that it's going to be huge in the upcoming period of time? Is there anything like that you feel it's going to go big?
Well, I do think AI, while I'm not a fan of robot generated voices faking podcast conversations, not a big fan of that. But I think AI is going to play a very, very huge role in the production and management of podcasts. It's that thing of, it's not going to replace you as a podcast producer, but it's going to give you a set of tools that make it easier to do that. And that's going to allow me to serve more clients because, to tell you the truth, I'm not trying to build a big business. I'm just trying to build a lifestyle. So, I have the number of clients that I need to maintain that. But, with these AI tools, I think people like me are going to be able to service more clients in a better way and in a more attentive way.
Awesome. So, do you have any insight for the people starting out in their career right now? And you obviously gave an insight for the businesses, but do you think if someone wants to be like Mike Styles and he wants to go into the space and create content for other people, do you have any actionable insight for the youngsters out there who want to pursue this as a career?
Yes, well, if you want to be like Mike Styles, you're going to have a very thick skin, which fortunately I developed in radio. I learned to take criticism very well, and I learned to adjust and adapt based, on what was coming at me. But I would say, the people who are coming up and coming out of college and entering this content marketing space, this content creation space, they're in a very unique position, right? Because they're digital natives. They were born with a smartphone in their hand. They were born making Instagram photos. And, a lot of this stuff comes naturally to them. But now comes the challenge of, okay, I have these skills. How do I translate that into a career, into the kind of career that I want to have? And that's the trick. So I would say, learn to be an entertainer. Like I said before, if you have the skills of a journalist and an entertainer, and you have a really good sense of what people like and what people love, if you bring that sense of showbiz to the brands that you start working with, you are going to stand out.
Awesome. So this was Mike Styles, a true innovator, bridging journalism, entertainment, and content strategy, corporate content strategy, I would say. And for more insights, people should definitely check out the podcast. Tell me if I'm spelling it correct. This Week in the Metaverse is the name of the podcast, and you guys should follow his groundbreaking work, and he keeps updated about the things happening in the industry and in his podcast itself. I'll be linking in the description. And Mike, a social media platform that you will be comfortable on if people want to connect to you and if they have any questions regarding this. So
Sure. I'm I'm at LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. I'm, in Mike Styles, Stiles. And, anyone can go to brandcontentstudios.com and my email is there. My contact info is there. Happy to talk about podcasting anytime. And congratulations on yours. This is a great one.
thank you so much. Thank you for being on the show. You have been an awesome guest, and your answers are basically very crisp and exactly what the audience wanted. And I hope people take actions from your whatever they have learned from this podcast. So thank you for being on the show. I would really like to get into details about podcasting some other day whenever you have time. And thank you for making time today.
All right. Thank you.